Since the dawn of time, humanity has asked one forbidden question: can the dead be made to speak? For thousands of years, men and women have dared to seek this forbidden power, the art of necromancy, the promise that the dead could be summoned, commanded, or even returned. From the Greek temples of the Underworld, where oracles called upon spirits for prophecy, to the biblical Witch of Endor, who summoned a ghost before a trembling king, to the dark graveyard rituals of medieval Europe, where witches were said to raise corpses and bind souls to their will. This is the ultimate taboo, the shadowy bond between witchcraft and the dead. Tonight, we open the tombs of history and uncover the chilling secrets of necromancy, ghosts and dark rituals, where silence is broken and the grave no longer keeps its secrets. But what exactly is necromancy? The word itself comes from the ancient Greek nekros, meaning dead, and manteia, meaning divination. It was the belief that the dead could reveal secrets hidden from the living, knowledge of the future, wisdom of the past, or truths too dangerous for mortals to speak aloud. To summon the dead was to break the most sacred boundary of all, the barrier between life and death. And for that reason, necromancy became the ultimate taboo. It wasn't just feared because of the rituals, the candles, the graves, the whispers in the dark. It was feared because it suggested that death itself could be manipulated, controlled, or undone. Across cultures and centuries, whispers of this practice appear again and again. The Greeks and Romans, who built temples dedicated to calling the spirits of the underworld. The ancient Hebrews, where the Bible condemns the Witch of Endor for raising a ghost before King Saul. The Celts, who believed that on certain nights the dead could walk among the living. And later, the witches of medieval Europe, accused of graveyard rituals and pacts with the restless dead. From prophecy to power, from reverence to fear, necromancy became a thread woven through the story of witchcraft. A thread that reveals not just how people saw witches, but how they understood death itself. To truly understand necromancy, we must return to the ancient world, where the line between the living and the dead was thinner, and the silence of the grave was not always trusted. In ancient Greece, there were places known as the Nekromanteion, temples of the dead. These were not ordinary shrines, but sacred gateways built on sites believed to touch the underworld itself. Pilgrims would descend into dark chambers, guided by priests who claimed to summon spirits. They drank potions mixed with herbs and hallucinogenic plants, chanted sacred hymns, and performed rituals deep underground. And then, in the flickering light of torches, voices were said to rise from the shadows, the spirits of the dead speaking prophecy. For the Greeks, necromancy was not merely superstition. It was a way to seek divine knowledge. To speak with the dead was to glimpse the will of the gods. And yet it carried danger. To disturb the underworld was to risk unleashing powers that even priests could not control. The Romans inherited these beliefs and twisted them further. While some Roman practices honored the spirits of ancestors, others turned darker. Roman necromancers were said to perform midnight sacrifices at graves, invoking restless souls to answer questions of fate, love, and war. Blood, bones, and offerings were given to bind the dead to their will. In their eyes, necromancy was not just a plea for guidance. It was an attempt to command the spirits, but perhaps the most chilling account comes from the Bible itself. The tale of the Witch of Endor, found in the first book of Samuel, is one of the most famous examples of necromancy in ancient texts. Desperate and terrified, King Saul sought the aid of a witch to summon the prophet Samuel from beyond the grave. And in the dead of night, she succeeded. The ghostly figure of Samuel rose before the king, his words filled with doom. This moment has echoed through centuries of fear. The idea that a mortal could tear open the veil between the living and the dead and bring forth a spirit that should have remained at rest. It was a story that painted necromancy not as wisdom, but as forbidden knowledge, a dangerous defiance of divine law. But necromancy was not confined to Greece, Rome, or the pages of Scripture. The belief that the living could reach into the realm of the dead is a story told on every continent, in every age. In Africa, the line between the living and the dead was never seen as absolute. Many cultures believed that the spirits of ancestors remained close, guiding, protecting, and sometimes punishing the living. Witches and shamans were thought to act as mediators, calling upon these spirits in rituals filled with drumming, fire, and sacrifice. Ancestors were not simply ghosts, they were guardians, sources of wisdom and power. But to anger them or to misuse their names was to invite curses that could stretch across generations. In Asia, traditions of the dead carried both reverence and fear. In ancient China, the spirits of one's ancestors were honored through offerings, incense, and carefully maintained altars. Families believed the dead could bless their descendants or bring misfortune if neglected. Rituals like the Ghost Festival kept the connection alive, ensuring the departed did not become restless. In Japan, the boundary between the living and the dead took on an even more haunting form. Folklore spoke of yurei, restless spirits bound to the world by rage, sorrow, or unfinished business. To call upon such a spirit was dangerous. Once awakened, they could not always be controlled. Japanese witches and mediums were said to summon or banish these ghosts through elaborate ceremonies, blending fear with respect for the unseen. And in the misty lands of Celtic Europe, the Festival of Samhain marked the night when the veil between worlds grew thin. On this night, it was believed that the dead could walk among the living. Fires were lit to ward off malevolent spirits, and offerings were left for ancestral souls returning home. Witches, druids, and seers were said to use Samhain's power to divine the future, drawing upon the whispers of those who had already crossed into death. Different lands, different rituals, but all shared the same truth. The dead were never gone. They lingered, watching, listening, waiting. And through witchcraft, humanity believed it could reach out and touch that shadowed world. But as the centuries turned, the ancient art of necromancy transformed. What had once been a sacred channel for prophecy, a whisper of ancestors, or a bridge to divine knowledge, was now branded as heresy, corruption, and black magic. In medieval Europe, the Church declared necromancy to be no longer communication with the dead, but communion with the devil himself. To summon a spirit, they taught, was not to call upon ancestors or angels, but to open the door to demons in disguise. Necromancers became synonymous with witches, sorcerers, and heretics, servants of Satan whose practices threatened the very soul of Christendom. The rituals described in folklore grew darker, more grotesque. Necromancers were said to steal into graveyards under moonless skies, digging up bones from freshly buried corpses. These bones, skulls, and even scraps of decayed flesh were believed to be powerful conduits for summoning spirits. Black candles lit the night, circles of salt and blood marked forbidden ground, and incantations whispered in Latin called the restless dead to rise. Stories spread of witches who bound spirits to their service, forcing the dead to reveal hidden treasures, curse enemies, or even reanimate corpses as shambling servants. Such tales painted necromancy as the ultimate blasphemy, the desecration of God's natural order, where the grave no longer meant peace, but enslavement. During the Renaissance, as Europe awakened to new sciences and rediscovered ancient texts, necromancy found itself at a dangerous crossroads. Scholars of forbidden books, grimoires like the Clavicula Salomonis or the Liber Officiorum Spirituum, whispered of rituals to call angels, demons, and the dead alike. To the church, these men were not enlightened seekers, but sorcerers who dabbled in the devil's scripture, and yet the fascination only deepened. Even nobles and kings were rumored to employ necromancers, desperate for glimpses of the future or for forbidden power that no priest could grant. Graveyards became stages for whispered rituals. Cathedrals themselves hid secrets in shadowed cloisters, where heretical monks sought to bend death to their will. In the eyes of common folk, necromancers were witches who had sold their souls for mastery over death, feared figures who haunted the margins of villages, blamed for plagues, disasters, and every unholy disturbance of the night. To accuse someone of necromancy was to brand them as both witch and devil worshipper, a crime punishable by fire. But the terror of necromancy did not stop at whispered rituals or forbidden grimoires. For medieval Europe, the greatest fear was not of sorcerers themselves, but of what they might unleash: the revenant, the restless corpse that clawed its way back from the grave. Across villages and towns, stories spread of the dead rising again, summoned by witches or cursed by dark magic. Unlike the gentle spirits of ancestors, these beings were grotesque, bloated, foul-smelling, and filled with rage. They did not whisper prophecies. They brought disease, terror, and death to the living. In Eastern Europe, such tales gave birth to early vampire legends, not the elegant monsters of later literature, but horrifying revenants that feasted on the blood and flesh of neighbors. Villagers swore they had seen their dead kin wandering the roads at night, knocking on doors, or choking the life out of sleepers. In England and Germany, Chronicles told of walking corpses that haunted churchyards, spreading plague and despair. Priests would order these revenants dug up, their bodies staked, burned, or decapitated to stop their unholy wanderings. The line between folklore and fear blurred. Every illness, every crop failure, every strange shadow in the night could be blamed on the restless dead. But what gave these stories their true power was the belief that witches and necromancers were behind them. In the popular imagination, a witch could raise a corpse from its grave, binding it to serve in her vengeance. Enemies could be cursed not just with misfortune, but with the horror of their loved ones returning as monsters. And so the fear spread, feeding the fires of the witch hunts. To accuse a woman of witchcraft was often to accuse her of necromancy as well, of dancing with demons in graveyards, of stealing bones to awaken corpses, of commanding spirits to torment the living. Trials across Europe recorded confessions, often forced through torture, of witches raising armies of the dead at midnight. By the late Middle Ages, the figure of the necromancer had become almost indistinguishable from the vampire, the witch, and the devil himself. The Revenant was not just a superstition, it was a symbol of a world gone wrong, of death refusing to obey the laws of God. But if the restless dead haunted the imagination of medieval Europe, what truly chilled the heart were the objects of death itself. For in the secret rites of witches and necromancers, death was not an end, it was a resource, a reservoir of hidden power waiting to be harvested from the grave. In countless grimoires and trial records, certain items appear again and again, each one drawn from the world of death, skulls and bones. To necromancers, a skull was more than a relic. It was believed to hold a fragment of the soul, a vessel that could speak in whispers if the proper incantations were uttered. Femurs, ribs, and finger bones were said to serve as charms, wands, or ritual tools, carved with sigils and runes of summoning. Blood, life itself, captured in its most potent form. Blood was thought to bind spells, to call spirits, or to seal pacts with forces beyond the veil. Whether animal or human, it was the essence of vitality, a bridge between the living and the dead. Graveyard soil, soft black earth gathered from the resting place of the departed. Carried in pouches, scattered in circles, or pressed into amulets, this soil was believed to contain the lingering energy of death. In folklore, witches would sprinkle it across thresholds to curse homes, or upon the sick to draw them closer to the grave. Shrouds and coffin wood, even the wrappings and containers of the dead, were thought to carry spiritual residue. A fragment of a burial shroud or a splinter of coffin wood could be used to summon a specific soul, binding it back to the living world. To the common folk, these objects were terrifying, signs that someone had trafficked with the grave. But to those accused of witchcraft, they carried deeper meaning, the symbolism of death as power. Death was not simply feared. It was transformed into a language of control. A skull was not decay. It was wisdom. A bone was not rot. It was a key. Blood was not corruption. It was the very essence of life, stolen and redirected. In this worldview, witches and necromancers inverted the sacred. Where the church saw the grave as holy rest, the sorcerer saw it as a doorway. Where the faithful saw a body as dust returning to God, the occultist saw it as a tool of forbidden mastery. And so the rituals became darker, more theatrical, more terrifying to outsiders. Midnight gatherings in graveyards, bones arranged in circles, candles dripping on skulls, invocations spoken over freshly dug earth. Even the rumor of such practices was enough to spark panic, fueling accusations, trials, and executions. For medieval society, there could be no clearer symbol of witchcraft than a hand clutching a bone, a pouch filled with soil, or an altar crowned with a human skull. It was the proof that the witch had embraced not just the devil, but death itself. And so, from bone and blood, from whispered rites in the dark, the image of the necromancer fused itself into the very heart of witchcraft lore. It was not only the graveyard that held their power. It was the imagination of a world that could never let go of its fear. For centuries, necromancy shaped the archetype of the dark witch. The witch was not just a healer, a midwife, or a woman accused of heresy. She became a figure of shadow, draped in the powers of death itself. To the medieval mind, if witches consorted with demons, then surely they also consorted with the dead. This union of devilry and death hardened into the blueprint of the witch we still recognize today. A solitary figure haunting graveyards at midnight, a sorceress who summoned spirits with chalk circles, and burning candles, a master or a victim of forces that lie beyond the veil. This vision did not fade with the witch trials. Instead, it endured, mutating into literature, drama, and eventually modern horror. From Dante's Inferno to Shakespeare's Macbeth, necromancy left fingerprints everywhere. The witches on the heath, stirring their cauldron, are echoes of medieval fears. Voices that channel spirits, that predict fate, that blur the line between the living and the dead. In Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th centuries, the necromancer re-emerged as both villain and tragic seeker, a figure willing to trespass into death's domain for knowledge or power. When we think of horror films today, zombies clawing their way out of the ground, skeletal hands breaking the soil, spirits bound by ritual, we are witnessing the afterlife of necromancy. Movies like Evil Dead, Pet Sematary, or The Witch all draw on the same primal fear, that death is not the end, and that someone might dare to command it. Even modern fantasy and gaming, from Lord of the Rings ring wraiths to video games where necromancers summon armies of the dead, borrow from this medieval archetype. The necromancer is no longer just a witch in a village trial. It has become a universal symbol of forbidden magic. But why, even today, does the idea of controlling the dead hold such power over our imagination? Because death is the one boundary that has never been broken. It is the ultimate unknown. To imagine a person who can reach beyond it, to raise the dead, to command souls, to defy mortality, is to imagine the deepest rebellion against the natural order. In a world where technology pushes the limits of life, cloning, AI, even whispers of digital immortality, necromancy continues to echo as the ancient version of the same question: can we master death, or will death always master us? That is the legacy of necromancy, not just a chapter in witch trials or folklore, but a shadow that lingers in our books, our films, our nightmares, and our secret desires. It gave us the archetype of the dark witch and etched into humanity's collective memory the most terrifying possibility of all: that the dead might not rest. Through every ritual, every whispered charm, and every forbidden spell, one truth has echoed louder than all the rest. Witchcraft's darkest bond is with death itself. From the necromancers of old to the witches of lore, to the horror stories that chill us today, it is the grave that has always been the final stage for magic's most terrifying performance. But here lies the question we cannot silence. If death is not the end, what answers still lie buried in the dark? Perhaps in shadows we fear, perhaps in memories we refuse to touch, or perhaps in secrets the earth has not yet given back. And now we turn to you. What do you believe? Is death an impenetrable wall, or a doorway that can still be opened? Have humanity's fears created the idea of necromancy? Or do those fears hide a darker truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all, and your reflections shape the mysteries we explore next. For now, remember this: witches, demons, and spirits may belong to myth, but death, the greatest mystery of all, is waiting for us all to meet it.